This is On the Other Hand. A podcast sponsored by Braver Angels in Arkansas that explores politics and other issues of importance to Arkansans. We do that through conversations with community leaders, so I hope you'll stay with us as we talk to another leader in Arkansas who works across differences to get things done and to bring us closer together. I'm your host, Glenn White, here with my co-host, April Chatham Carpenter. As you probably know, on our podcast, April and I interview community leaders in Arkansas who help work towards solutions across various political or other divides, or in some other way reach across the various divisions in our community. So, April, tell us who our guest is today.
Well, Glenn, I'm really excited to learn today from Dr. Jay McDaniel. Jay has been a philosopher and a theologian for many years, and he's taught at Hendrix College. I think he's professor emeritus now, but we'll hear a little bit more about his work. And among other things, in terms of things that he teaches and studies, he studies Buddhist theology and process philosophy and theology, as well as interfaith dialogue and spirituality in our current age. Jay has his background in English literature and philosophy and theology, and with a variety of different degrees. And he also has published many books and articles. He's got a blog I just was reading from today called Open Horizons at openhorizons.org, in case anybody wants to look that up. And he's previously, I think that blog was entitled Jesus, Jazz, and Buddhism. So we'll maybe hear a little bit more about that title. I think kind of represents some of his interest, and the aim in that, in much of his work, and I've heard, is to help people actually create these communities that are multicultural and interfaith, that can be, where we can practice compassionate listening, being participatory with each other, and also just to be creative and enjoyable. So welcome to On the Other Hand, Jay.
Well, it's so great to be with both of you, with Glenn and April, and I'm just looking forward to our conversation. And I admire your podcast a lot. So it's an honor to be part of this process.
Well, thank you, Jay. We're going to actually start out with a question that'll maybe get our listeners interested in what you do. I know your profession involves religion, and oftentimes that's something that we're told to, don't talk about religion or politics because you don't want to make people upset. But you don't have that option if this is something that you study, or maybe you haven't chosen that option. I'm curious, have you had a recent argument or misunderstanding with someone about faith? And if so, how did you handle it?
Well, first, let me say it's much easier to talk about religion than it is to talk about politics. I taught courses at Hendrix College in the world's religions for 39 years. And 1 week I'd be on Buddhism, 1 week on Hinduism, 1 week on Islam, 1 week on Judaism, 1 week on native traditions. And I found that my students, including those that came from conservative backgrounds, ended up simply being interested, just interested in how other people look at the world and live in the world. So I really didn't find that to be much of a problem. What's much more difficult is to talk about political issues. Point one. April, point two, today, politics functions religiously. The devotion that people, in the sense of loyalty and identity, that people feel actually with particular political parties, to say you're a Democrat or to say you're Republican is to say something about your identity and about your values, about your worldview. And that's what religion does. And also the passion that you feel and the sense of threat that you can feel if somebody challenges that portion of your life. That's quite pronounced. So my challenge has been to take what I know of interreligious dialogue, which I think actually comes fairly easily. I'd love to talk about it, and take some of that and take it into the domain of intercultural and interpolitical dialogue. So I'll start with that, but then I'll answer your question. But do you have a follow-up to anything I just said?
Yeah, actually, I'm curious as to, you said politics functions like religiosity. I think
Yes.
not exactly how you said it, but why is that today?
The more you study religion, simply from an academic perspective, you realize that it has a whole lot to do with identity and community. And so to be a Baptist or a Methodist or whatever, it has a lot to do with identifying with a certain kind of people you like to hang out with and you think you have something in common with. That's community. And then it signals who you think you are. That's a sense of identity. And so I think politics has actually always functioned religiously, but even more intensely in our time, vis-a-vis partisan politics. So I don't really think there's anything new. It gets a little more complicated, April, because the more you study the world's religions, the more you realize that historically, you cannot separate Islam, for example, from a political agenda. It's part of the religion. You really can't separate Judaism from a desire for a nation. It's part of what it means to be Jewish. It's been a little easier for Christians to disaggregate something they call Christianity from their cultural, political location, but not entirely. And today, within Christianity, that has very much collapsed because so many, particularly evangelical Christians, wed religion and politics in ways that are very difficult to separate. But in so doing, they're coming to mirror or resemble what historically Islam and Judaism has always done.
I kind of like for you to tell us about maybe a recent potential misunderstanding or argument that you had with someone. It could have been about politics and not about faith, if that's the harder thing to talk about.
And the whole point of asking that is because what we focus on is people having difficult moments like that and how you get through it in a civil fashion. So we're interested in learning from someone like you and how you handle things like that.
First, simply a word about discussions of doctrine within religion. A lot of people, when they think interreligious dialogue has to be a discussion, it pertains to beliefs, a discussion of beliefs, core beliefs. And I think early on in my life, I was very much interested in debating beliefs. I'm a philosopher by training. I love ideas. So, let's take the Christian idea of the Trinity. To talk with fellow Christians who don't believe in the Trinity. By the way, I'm among them. I'm a Christian, but it's not such an important idea. But I love to talk. I don't think Jesus was a Trinitarian. But one thing I discovered early on is no one changes his or her mind. In the midst of a vehement discussion of doctrine, no minds are changed. It's not as if someone else, your partner says, "Oh, good point. Hadn't thought of that. From now on, I will think differently." It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. And so I realized really the futility, but in a way, the irrelevance of debating certain kinds of doctrines. And then I realized myself, what matters much more is not exactly what a person believes, but how that configures in their lives and the kinds of person that helps them become. So I may disagree with you profoundly on certain theological matters, but your beliefs may help you become kinder in a way that far transcends me. You become a better person through those beliefs, even though I disagree with them. So I'm interested in character and how people are as persons. I'm much more interested in that than formal beliefs. So it's been a long, long time since I've had a debate with anybody where I've tried to convince them to come around to my way of thinking on matters of doctrine. I just don't find that very helpful or important. But I have two kinds of dialogues in the political arena. And do you want me to say a word about that?
Yeah, I'd like to hear that.
One is a dialogue with people who are more conservative than I am politically. So I typically vote Democrat. I'm not avid about that, but typically I do. But I have friends and family members that vote Republican and feel as fervently or as they're as decisive in the way they see things as I am in the way I see things. And to tell you the truth, I yearn for opportunities where we can talk about those matters. And I find that very difficult. But where I do have my dialogues is inside my own head. And so I've had many a conversation with someone much more conservative than I in my own mind. And one thing that I've discovered in those imaginary dialogues, probably have them twice a day, is that my own desire in those dialogues is not so much to win a battle, but it's to be understood. I want my friends, I want my family members on the other side, so to speak. I want them to understand where I'm coming from. However, they want exactly the same thing, and they deserve it. They want to be understood. It may come across as they want to convince me, but good luck on that one. But they want to be understood just as much as I do. And so what true interpolitical dialogue, it has to begin with listening. It has to begin with at least one side saying, I'm going to set aside my political passions. I want to hear your perspective. And I don't just want to hear about the policies you adopt. I want to hear why they're important to you and what life circumstances make them important to you. And I want to hear about the beauty that you hear in them sometimes. It's kind of like teaching a world religion. I may not be a member of belong to that religion, but I want to hear about the beauty that you hear in the religion you practice. I'll be quiet. I'll listen. You talk. And then sometimes I may try to say, now I think this is what you're saying. And if I miss it, just correct me. So what I've realized, April, is that in our context today, very few people can listen like that. Our educational systems have failed miserably to teach us to become that kind of listener, to really listen to other people that are different from us on their own terms, for their own sakes. And the churches have failed completely as well. You don't go to Sunday school, to Sabbath, to your local mosque, and you don't learn to be a good listener. You learn the tenets of your faith, how to practice it, this, that, or the other. But I think churches and education have failed rather miserably. And that's the situation we find ourselves in today. Everybody wants to proclaim, everybody wants to be understood, but few of us are able to listen.
So how do we learn to do that?
First, a word just about relations between religions, which I have already said I don't think is quite as difficult. But if you're a Christian and you want to get to know Islam, you need to make friends with some Muslims. And you need to spend time with them. And you need to learn about their families and their struggles and what they love. And so you need to build a friendship. I think it's the same with politics, actually. I need to make friends with people on, so to speak, the other side. And not just so we can work together on practical matters. That's a very good thing. But no, I need to make friends with them. And I need to care about them. And I need to want their well-being, even as we disagree.
How do we go about doing that?
Yeah.
Making friends when maybe our whole typical circle around us is like
Right.
us, so we don't even know how to go about meeting people who are different than us.
The bottom line is there need to be contexts in which you get to be around people that are different from you and so-called on the other side of the political spectrum. Contexts in which you can ask, what do you love? What gives you joy? And one thing that you're going to quickly find is that what gives people joy is the same thing that every kindergarten teacher knows: food, music, and storytelling. And if you're a kindergarten teacher, you well know that those three things will bring your class together because everybody loves those three things: food, music, and storytelling. Well, I think it's the same in our context. Now, in my particular context, it's music. And so I play music at a local restaurant outside Conway, Arkansas, where I live, every Thursday night from 6 to 8. And it's a little pop country band. And we play songs that we all love. My Girl by the Temptations. And what I find is that then I will go sit at a table with some folks. And I happen to know that the place where I play, I'm guessing about 80%, didn't vote as I vote. And they may have a sneaking suspicion that old ex-professor may be just a bit more liberal. But it really doesn't matter because we both love My Girl by the Temptations. And we want to talk about that. What do you like about that? Or just to say to one another, don't you love it? Don't you love that song? I saw you singing along with it. Yeah, I love it too. And you're tapping your feet. You may have wanted to dance. I did too. And by the way, is this your daughter or your son sitting next to you? What's your name and where do you go to school? Do you go to school? So you get to know about their family. And then, well, what'd you order tonight? Oh, how was it? Was it any good? Any good? Oh, it's Christmas time, or it's a holiday season. You're going to get some friends together. Any customs you do at home? I'd love to hear about them. Tell me. See, you've opened the door in that conversation for things they love. And they feel affirmed, and they are affirmed. You're not kidding. You're not crossing your fingers like I'm just going through the motions. No. So I think there have to be contexts in which we get to do that kind of thing. We need to find shared joys that bypass the political divides. Then at some stage, we can talk about the politics if we wish. But by then, we so care about each other that we're okay. We can do it. Tell me why you feel this way. I want to listen, and I can say, would you like to hear how I feel too? And if I sense that they're so frustrated or so angry on that particular front that they don't want to hear my perspective, I say, so be it. So be it. One of the condition of this friendship is not dependent on you satisfying my need to be understood. I have to admit I'd like it, but that doesn't mean we don't both like the Temptations.
Mm-hmm. Before we get too much further, I'd love for you to talk about the work that you currently are doing professionally and in the community.
Well, I think at a very practical level, I've been pretty active for maybe 6, 7, 8 years with a group called Interfaith Arkansas. The former executive director of Interfaith Arkansas was a woman named Sophia Said. And Sophia Said also started the first interesting mosque in Little Rock, the Medina Institute. And she was one of the first women in the United States, actually, to start a mosque. And the board of directors was largely female. But of course, it's families and men and women alike. And Sophia and I started working together, and she was also executive. So here she was, president of a mosque and also executive director of Interfaith Arkansas. So those two roles. And so we started offering a whole lot of programs together, Sophia and I. And they would be on, for example, the world's religions. And in those early years, we taught those religions at the mosque. So here you were, Medina Mosque, and you could go there on Wednesday at noon and learn about Buddhism or Hinduism or Judaism. And Jay McDaniel would lead the discussion, but everybody gets to talk. And this is done at a mosque. I am so proud of that mosque. And then we offered more courses. We taught courses on art and spirituality, movies and spirituality, poetry and spirituality. A course would typically last eight Wednesdays. So we'd have an 8 Wednesday session on poetry and spirituality. We actually had a very specific notion of spirituality in mind. We used something we called the spiritual alphabet that we got from a group called Spirituality in Practice. And the spiritual alphabet was A is for attention, B is for beauty, C is for connection, D is for devotion, E is for enthusiasm, F is for faith and forgiveness, G is for gratitude, H is for hospitality, I is for imagination, J is for justice, K is for kindness, L is for listening, M is for meaning making, N is for nurturing. And I'm not going to go through all of those, but you may be wondering, well, what in the world was X? And the answer was X is for a sense of mystery.
Oh.
It's for saying the freedom to say, I don't know. I don't know. And W, everybody loved W. W was for wonder. That sense of awe, amazement. And how about S? S was for silence, being quiet. And so if you listen to that, you don't have to talk about a particular religion. You talk about those attitudes, those feelings, those approaches to life. And they become a foundation for many different people to plug in. You can be Muslim, Jewish, and actually you can be Republican or Democrat. Doesn't matter. You still like wonder. You still have that sense of mystery. You still appreciate kindness. So we did courses for 5 or 6 years. Sophia, there's a new executive director. Her name is Patricia Matthews, and I work with her too. And she's great. She's also an Episcopal priest. But my work in Little Rock has been a lot through that mosque and my work with Sophia and the Interfaith Center.
I was wondering, are you still teaching actively at Hendricks, or is that something that's you're no longer?
I'm retired. I'm retired.
Okay.
So
okay.
I'm emeritus.
And for those of us who are not academically inclined, Professor Emeritus means?
Oh, it just, well, I think the positive reading is esteemed The genuine meaning is old. So that just means that you're an esteemed former professor.
Do you identify as a Buddhist Christian? Did I get that right?
Pretty close, Glenn. Not exactly, though. And if you say Buddhist Christian, it can kind of sound like you think of yourself as both of them Scotch taped together. And that's not me. I'm really a Christian. And what that means for me is I want to walk in the footsteps of Jesus and share in his journey. I'm not a biblical literalist. There's a lot of, but I do want to share in Jesus's journey.
Okay.
But I have found Buddhism tremendously helpful, and still do, always will. As what that really means. I think Buddhism has helped me in countless ways to better walk with Jesus.
A couple of my Buddhist friends have told me that being a Buddhist, you can be a Buddhist and be in any other religion.
You can.
That
I
helps you
personally
with
think you can. I think they're right. By the way, there's a whole phenomenon in America of Jews that are influenced by Buddhism, and they have a kind of playful name for themselves. They call themselves Jubus.
that.
And yeah, and you know, if you're in a Jewish friends with, if you have Jewish friends or you are Jewish, you know what a Jubu is.
Let me ask you this. I mean, so this is what you are now. A little bit about your early life. Tell us about some of the early influences as you're growing up and as a young adult that were the influences that led you to your current theological perspectives or outlook on life.
Glenn, I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, and I went to a very warm Methodist church. The only teaching I got there was that God is love. There was no mention of hell. There was really not a biblical literalism. There was no fear. I was also very much shaped by popular culture. I loved and still love music. And I was also shaped by two experiences. I learned to swim in a river, the Guadalupe River of the hill country of Texas. And I loved animals, still do. I love dogs. And if I were to talk about my spiritual upbringing, I would need to mention all of that. It wouldn't be right just to talk about churches, and I would need to mention the Guadalupe River in the role of dog, companion animals, and really the thrill of music, rhythm, melody. All of that are strands that made me me and still do. Then I went to college, and have you ever heard of something called the 60s?
Oh, yes, I lived through them.
Well, I did too. And everything was turned upside down, at least for me. And I began to question everything. Everything. I don't think I ever questioned dogs or rivers, but I'm sure I questioned all the other things. And at that stage, I turned to Christianity anew. But what I found that I turned to was a Christianity that was more narrow than of my childhood, more rigid, more doctrinaire, more certain that it was right. And I didn't actually like the person that I was becoming. I had not expected that. I didn't want that. That's not who I wanted to be. So I began to read everything I could about different ways of understanding Christianity. And I discovered a Catholic writer named Thomas Merton, and he really shaped my life. And he was influenced by Buddhism. And so that got me interested in Buddhism and Catholicism. And I went to seminary to become a Methodist minister. And it was a great experience. And in seminary, I took more courses in the world's religions. You could do that where I went to seminary. In seminary, I was actually at the same time asked to be the English teacher for a Zen Buddhist priest from Japan.
I really appreciate hearing your personal narrative, and you're right. There are so many things that influence us to become the people we are, and to believe
Yeah.
what we believe, and to adopt our religious beliefs. All of that, I think, is entirely legitimate. So I appreciate your covering that.
Well, we thank you for joining us on today's edition of On the Other Hand. This was the first part of our conversation with Dr. Jay McDaniel. Be sure to check out the second part of this conversation with Jay as well. And you can also check out other podcast episodes of On the Other Hand. And to find that, go to the podcast page of the Braver Angels Arkansas website. You can find that at arkansas.braverangels.org or on many popular podcast sites.
And when you visit that website, in addition to the links to all of our episodes, you'll find a link where you can email us with your program feedback or speakers you might suggest. That email is otherhandar@gmail.com. Now, one of the things that I suggest is you check out some of our other episodes with other guests, and a previous episode in particular that you might be interested in is with Daniel Reimer, who is a Baha'i faith leader and organizer of something called Meaningful Conversations. You can find that conversation with Daniel at episodes 10 and 11.
On the Other Hand is sponsored by Braver Angels in Arkansas. Music was composed by Randall Standridge of Jonesboro, Arkansas, and was performed by the University of Northern Colorado Symphonic Band, Dr. Richard Main, conductor.
From your host, Glenn White,
and April Chatham Carpenter,
let's each do our part to bring our community closer together.